All right, welcome everyone back to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, episode 14. I am Jesse Collings. I'm here with my co-host, as always, Jason Ounpraseuth. Jason, how's it going?
It's going well. It's been a hectic 24 hours, and we'll get into that. And you know, all hail our new overlord, Nick Khan, is all I can say.
Nick, someone a few weeks ago told me that, not told me, like I just saw it on Twitter, so it wasn't like some
Right.
inside source was telling me, but said like, oh, Nick Khan could end up running the whole wrestling business. And I wasn't like, I was like, okay, I mean, I doubt it. But I had been noticing that Vince clearly is a huge fan of him, and
Mhm.
he's got a level of savviness and just like um I don't know that like I honestly don't know that much about like George Barrios and Michelle Wilson, like what their backgrounds were, how effective they were in their jobs. I don't really know that much, but it seems like Nick Khan just has a level of understanding when it comes to things like media rights, when it comes to answering questions and the energy and vibe he kind of gives off. It seems like he's like I don't want to say like he's better, I think, at this public element of the job than a Barrios or a Wilson. And it's gonna be really interesting. You see a big shakeup. Obviously, the story about Mark Carrano getting fired, but a lot. Last night there was like a huge bloodletting. They got rid of I think the director of communications. They got rid of
Mhm.
somebody who was in merchandise or something like that. They got rid of some long-standing. I know John Cone, the former referee,
Yeah.
who was an executive backstage. He's gone. Like they got rid of some people who were around for a really long time, and I think that it's likely that they're going to be replaced by Nick Khan people. But we're not here to talk about Nick Khan. I know this has become a gimmick where we talk about something that's not related to what our actual topic is for the first few minutes. But what we are here to talk about is life after WWE, particularly for wrestlers who have either asked for their release or been fired or let go from WWE, and what their careers look like afterwards. And we're going to talk a little bit about people who have found success outside of WWE. And we're also going to talk about people who were recently let go by WWE and what kind of their career aspirations look like. And to start, we'll talk about the last week the releases. I believe it was 8 talent in total. Um, Maybe it was 9. I have to count. Well, I'll count them later. But the talent that were released in kind of what has become a WWE tradition, which is to release a wave of talent post WrestleMania when you're kind of hitting the reset button, starting the year over on the WWE calendar. And WWE released a bunch of names. I'll just read them off right here. Samoa Joe. You've got the IIconics, Billy Kay and Peyton Royce. You've got Wesley Blake. You've got Mojo Rawley. You've got Tucker. You've got Chelsea Green. You've got Kalisto. And you've got Mickie James. I think that's everyone. Am I missing somebody?
You say Bo Dallas?
Yep. Sorry, Bo Dallas. Bo Dallas, who has not wrestled a match since 2019. Also, finally,
Yeah.
the axe finally came for him. Um, but let's start with Samoa Joe because he's the biggest name and he's the person that I think most people people are the most excited about in general. Now that Joe is gone from WWE, Jason, what was your kind of reaction to seeing Joe being gone, and where do you expect to see him pop up next? Assuming he still wants to be in the wrestling business, which by all accounts he does.
Right. Yeah. That seems to be the impression that he still wants to wrestling. Pending health, of course. I'm sure he'll get a lot of check out with doctors and all that, see if he can still wrestle. But yeah, I mean, just on that alone, like because he couldn't wrestle, he was doing commentary on Raw for a couple months, and it seemed like, oh, this is like his transitionary role until he can wrestle, or even if he couldn't, he could just be with WWE for a long time, like in the new Corey Graves, so to speak. But then he got released, and then that put a turn on everything about the expectations within him. Like it was so strange that you had that was in the ring during WrestleMania, and then he gets released after that. It was just so shocking to see that, like, oh, because like we said before, like you mentioned before, like Bo Dallas wrestled since 2019. It makes sense why he gets cut, But Samoa Joe, like he's been used every week on your flagship show. I mean,
Yeah.
like SmackDown. SmackDown's probably your flagship show, but Raw is always the bigger show. It's just in general, and he's doing the commentary there, and it's just so shocking to see him released. And as of now, we'll have to wait and see. Of course, Punk and Joe, they've been teasing a match. That's probably stirring up the dirt sheets, basically, just get more clicks for them. Like I they'll actually have a match. But could Samoa Joe go Ring of Honor? I could see that. Maybe he takes a 1-year deal, like a prove it deal, just to show that hey, I can still go, I can still wrestle. Because it's been a while since we actually seen Samoa Joe in the ring, and so I can see him take a 1-year deal of Ring of Honor, uh, wires a little bit, get his footing back. I'm sure there's probably some ring rust in there just to get himself going. And then, after that, he could sign a bigger deal of AEW perhaps, because right now, look at AEW, it seems pretty packed right now. Like it's pretty hard to see him sort of just randomly insert into a storyline, especially with Double or Nothing coming up next month. Like it's really hard to see him just pop up right away. And we'll definitely see him take a 1-year prove it deal at Ring of Honor right now. I don't know. What do you think, Jesse?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you bring up the prove it deal. I do think that there are talents that, if they want to continue wrestling, are going to maybe have to take a prove it deal somewhere, as opposed to maybe walking into a big spot in Ring of Honor or in AEW or perhaps New Japan. The thing about Joe is that my understanding is that the reason he was, out of action for so long was because of concussions. And concussions are different than regular injuries. It's possible that he's not medically cleared, but it's also possible that he's good to go. And if he's good to go, then I think the sky's the limit for him. You know, someone was saying like this is not. I think I was listening to the Voices of Wrestling show, and one of the points was like, look, Samoa Joe's not the same guy, physically anymore that he was in 2005 or 2006 when he was, when he had his feud with CM Punk, or he was killing it when he wrestled Kurt Angle. I think that was in 2008. In TNA, and when he was like peak Samoa Joe. But to me, like Samoa Joe, as long as he's medically cleared, like it doesn't even matter to me that much if he's not like an amazing, relentless worker. Because to me, with Joe, you're getting a guy who still has like an aura around him as a badass.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's Samoa Joe. He's just, and that's what he's always had. And even if he's not as athletic as he used to be, if he's not as doesn't have like the cardio that he used to have or whatever, it still matters that he has like a badass aura around him, and he's a great talker. And in AEW, when you're allowed to cut your own promos, or basically everywhere you're allowed to cut your own promos except WWE,
Mm-hmm.
he's still gonna get over. He's still gonna have that aura. And even if he's like, okay, you can't count on him to have a 5-star classic with Kenny Omega. If he can still go out there and he can produce entertaining programs, and he can be a top challenger, he can put people over. He just has a level of like badass credibility that's hard to find. And even if he's even if he's kind of like, I don't want to say damaged goods, that's kind of a mean thing to say, but even if he's not 100% what he used to be, he can still be extremely useful and a huge asset wherever he goes. That could be Ring of Honor, could be AEW. He's obviously been a lifelong fan of Japanese pro wrestling. If you ever watched him wrestle, that's pretty obvious who he patterned himself after. I could see him doing kind of a John Moxley-like deal where he's going to do some important dates in New Japan, and he'll also be, around in AEW. Anywhere would be happy to have him. And, you raised an interesting point about, like, yeah, Joe, like, he wasn't Bo Dallas, he wasn't Tucker, he wasn't Wesley Blake, he wasn't Kalisto. Like, yeah, he wasn't wrestling, and maybe he wants to wrestle, and that's why he asked for his release. Because it's unclear of who got released because they were fired, right, and who got released because they had asked for their release previously and they were just being let go now. Because I think that kind of overlaps between both people. But Joe was on TV all the time. He was, your color commentator on Raw for 3 hours every week, plus your pay-per-views, and he was good. Like, he was a good commentator, and I think that WWE liked him as a commentator. I don't think that I never really heard or got the idea that WWE didn't like him as a commentator because they, had him out there all the time. And if Vince hated him, he wouldn't have been doing commentary on Raw. So yeah, it was kind of weird to see him go. But if he wants to wrestle and he's healthy to wrestle, then I think the sky's the limit for him.
Yeah, I mean, Samoa Joe can be like, I mean, it's like Christian Cage. Like, obviously, Christian is not in the same physical peak he once was, but he can still work. He can still tell good stories, and he's shown that through 2 matches. At least in my opinion, anyway. Through his Kazarian match, he showed he can still go, and it was Will Hobbs match. He showed that he can tell a good story within the ring. Really helping out, elevating Will Hobbs to another level, really giving him the rub by working with them. And Samoa Joe's the same way. Like, he obviously has a fantastic mind for pro wrestling. You hear this guy talk about pro wrestling, like, he obviously knows what he's talking about, and he knows how to tell all these amazing stories with anyone.
Yeah, I mean, Samoa Joe, like, I know this is true for most people, but Samoa Joe just loves pro wrestling. It's really obvious that he loves it, and it's hard to, like, I was like, hey, assuming he still wants to be in the business, like hell yeah, he still wants to be in the business. Well, one of the things about concussions that's different, like when you miss time because of concussions, which Christian is another one who missed a ton of time and was effectively retired due to concussions, is that, and Daniel Bryan talked about this when, he had his era of retirement, which is because you're missing time because you have your concussions, and they say you can't clear you because of concussions, as opposed to a chronic knee issue or back issue or shoulder issue or something like that, is that you actually, as if you continue to go to the gym and you continue to work out, even though you're not going to return to the ring, you feel better. Like Daniel Bryan said, that I feel better physically than I have since I was, a teenager, because I haven't been wrestling. I'm not taking that pounding every week or, multiple times a week. And it's frustrating because I feel like I'm healthier than ever and I can wrestle at a higher level than ever because I've had this time off to let my body heal. And for Samoa Joe, who hasn't wrestled, I think, in over a year, he could be in better shape. Obviously a guy who's been wrestling his style for the length of time he wrestled had plenty of lingering injuries. And realistically, by the time he came to WWE and by the time he made it to the main roster, it might have been too late for him just physically, because I think it's true that his body was breaking down, so that he was never going to be able to reach that potential, as opposed to if he had made the main roster 10 years earlier. But that doesn't mean he's not useful. And I'm interested to see like how he can go, because Christian is in Christian's older, he looks older, but cosmetically he looks like he's in great shape. Edge is a similar thing. He had a neck injury, not a concussions, which is very different kind of, I guess, from a pain standpoint. But like Edge came back and he's like, he looks older, and I think maybe that could be problematic just because you don't want your top guy to look like he's 50, but physically, look great. He's leaner. Got abs. Like looks. I don't think if Samoa Joe has abs and he's leaner, I mean, AEW should put the world title on him. But moving on from Samoa Joe, I don't know if I'll go through everyone on the list. Is there who else from this released class are you, I guess, either surprised to see let go / interested to see what they do next? Who else jumps out at you?
I guess another surprise would be Billie Kay, and I guess in association with her Payne Royce. Like Billie Kay's are sort of a similar standpoint for Samoa Joe, in that, like, whether you liked it or not, she was at least doing something on television, like in most weeks on SmackDown, even WrestleMania as well. Like, again, like it was pretty mixed on whether people liked her comedy segments.
She was getting pins at WrestleMania.
Yeah, exactly. Like she was doing something in the company, and to see her get released was shocking. And of course, that report came out of Kevin Dunn saying he didn't quote get Billie Kay. It's kind of just screams like this sort of, I guess, how out of WWE is. It's always about what they want, and not really reacting to fans, because these, Billie Kay and the IIconics, they have a huge loyal fan base that they have. Like, people were shocked when they got broken up. We talked about this, how WWE had no plans for them after that. They kind of just put Payne Royce in random tag teams, and same with Billie Kay. She would always try to find her own tag team partner, even though like already in a tag team? Why can't they just be one themselves? And even Sean Ross Sapp, he's pointing out that like, hey, NXT has these new tag titles, and it already feels like they've already run out of teams to tag with for the champions. It's gonna be the Way versus Ember and Shotzi forever for the next couple months because they've already released a good depth of their tag team pool, and so that seems very shocking to see both of them get released.
Yeah, I mean, with the IIconics, it's, they unfortunately suffered the fate of a lot of similar tag teams or units that are, people who are better off as a team, and then they get split up for no other real reason other than just we need to shoot an angle to entertain our fans. So let's do a team splitting up. Yeah, let's do that. And there's plenty of people. You can look at Rusev and Lana. You can look at Heavy Machinery. I mean, Tucker is another person who got released and is almost in a similar boat. Kind of like, it's interesting. Like Tucker and Peyton Royce maybe don't have a lot in common, but they were both part of a tag team that, whether people liked them or not, had some form of charm that allowed, they had their fans.
Yeah.
And they got split up for no reason. They never even really did a good angle to like, it wasn't like it built up to a huge match. And then, Billy Kay, who, I mean, if you were to like during the IIconics run, if you were to say who's going to be the breakout star from the IIconics once they split up, I probably would have said Peyton. I wouldn't have said Billy. But Billy, through comedy, was able to find a niche on SmackDown at least. And Peyton was just, wasting away on Raw, not doing anything. And this, Tucker, similar thing. Tucker and Otis. Otis got a comedy push similar to Billy Kay's to a degree, and Tucker got nothing. And Tucker was wasting away, doing nothing. And I think that's unfortunately the reality of WWE, especially if you're in a tag team, because the company doesn't value tag team wrestling. They don't understand or consider the value of a team. As soon as it's been said a million times, as soon as you start getting over, WWE will start thinking of a way to break you up, because in their minds, they're thinking about the angle of the breakup and how, it's going to be Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, or it's going to be, a real famous tag team split up. And, they split up people who have no business splitting up. They split up the Hardy Boys. They split up the Dudleys. Who splits up the Dudleys? I know, this was back in, I think, 2004, but they split up, Bubba Ray and Devon, and they gave Devon, like this weird preacher gimmick where he was, yeah, that's how Batista originally made his main roster debut. But it's like, why would you split up the Dudley Boys? But that's what WWE does. They split up people because when they run out of ideas for you as a tag team, like, just split them up, as opposed to maybe rethinking them. Where do you think the IIconics are going? Do you think, I mean, let's assume they stick together. Maybe they won't. I have no idea. Where do you see them going?
I think ideally, Impact already has women's tag titles, and so that'd be a good spot for them to build up their women's division. I mean, just last night, Rachel Ellering made her debut, and so they're obviously adding more talent to their pool that they are. They already have great talent with Deanna Prato, Jordan Grace, and a bunch of other talents over there. Ring of Honor, they just announced, I think it was this week, right? Like they're doing this whole women's tournament kind of thing. And so they're obviously trying to rebuild their women's division over there as well. And so I think that would be good places for them. I think you wrote about this as well, like how like the IIconics aren't really big enough for AEW, but I think they can grow to be big enough to eventually maybe be on AEW. But I think right now, as they are, I think being on Impact or Ring of Honor be good places to really establish themselves, and they'd automatically be big names just because they're former WWE.
Yeah, well, my thing with the IIconics in AEW is that personally, I just don't think they're that good in the ring.
Sure.
And AEW, to me, their women's division, they need, if they're looking for people to add, I would think less comedy, entertainment based, more like serious pro wrestlers that can carry some of their less experienced talents.
Sure.
That they're looking to push. I think like the Hikaru Shida Tay Conti match from this week is a good example of like getting a veteran worker in there and helping a less experienced worker with potential reach that potential in the match. And I don't think like I don't see their role. I think Impact is a great spot for them because, and also, if you watch Impact's TV, which I'm a casual viewer of, I'm not like watching every week, but the kind of vibe they're going for, they do a lot of comedy, they do a lot of backstage skits, they do a kind of a very sports entertainment-y style show, and I think from their personalities, I think they'd be a better fit in Impact. And as far as Ring of Honor is concerned, they apparently are trying to push their women's division again. They're trying to make a more investment in it. And look, any of these women who got released, whether it's the IIconics, Mickie James, or Chelsea Green, I think Ring of Honor would love to have any of them because A, they have name value, but B, they can also bring something to the division that is pretty bare bones at this point. There's not a lot there in Ring of Honor. Is there anybody else you want to talk about? Let's talk about Mickie James real quick, just because I think that she's been in the news a lot due to they sent her, if people haven't seen it, WWE sent her remaining belongings. I guess they were what stuff she's, I don't know if it was her gear or just stuff she had, in the locker rooms or whatever. They sent it to her in a trash bag with her name duct taped to it, and it was emailed not emailed. It was sent to her, and she posted on social media, kind of sarcastically saying, "Thanks, Vince McMahon, for my stuff." And people, it's one of those things I don't really understand the outrage that much because, like, the way the picture is framed, it looks like super disrespectful. Like, oh, they just gave her all her stuff in a trash bag, and that's it. And I think people are too mad about that and not mad enough about the fact that these people were fired.
Sure.
Which is, and the people were mad last week when they were fired, but it's, they Mark Carrano was the fall guy for it, as we said. He the thing about Carrano, who was the head of talent relations, is that Carrano had already kind of been de-emphasized on WWE. They brought back John Laurinaitis to be the new head of talent relations, and kind of Mark Carrano had taken a back seat, and so he was logical to use as a fall guy here in that scenario. But beyond the trash bag incident, Mickie James to me is a really interesting person because, again, she's someone that assuming she still wants to wrestle, and she's given the implication that she really wants to wrestle, everyone should want to have her because she brings a lot to the table. In AEW, obviously she has name value, but also is still, a veteran worker that can help a lot of these younger, inexperienced women get over. Bring Mickie James in and have her work a program with Jade Cargill. I think that's a great idea. Have her work a program with Penelope Ford. Have her work a program with, Britt Baker. To me, that's easy stuff to do. If you're Ring of Honor, maybe you bring her in and you make her your champion and you build the entire division around her. I know, she's not a star you're creating, but to me, you're looking at a roster that's, like I said, pretty bare bones. You want to have, you get someone with a name, someone who can work, someone that has such a long career in the business. That's the kind of person you want to start things around. Impact, obviously, she has a long history in Impact. Same thing, same value she'd bring to AEW. She could bring to Impact, and obviously you can't rule out NWA because she's married. Is she married to Nick Aldis?
Yes, she is.
Yeah, so she's married to Nick Aldis. It would not surprise me at all. NWA, like Ring of Honor, is probably very hungry. I don't want to say desperate, but looking for anyone who might be able to fill a role. They would love to have her as well. So if she wants to work, I think she's going to have plenty of landing spots. What do you think about Mickie?
Yeah, I think the big thing was just not even. I think this goes beyond like the trash bag thing. I think Mickie James, she's been vocal about how there's sort of double standard about older women's wrestlers.
Mm-hmm.
They're sort of cast to the wayside, which is understandable. Like, just look at the way WWE treats her. Like, she's a legend within WWE history, and she's not really treated as such. But even then, like, you see the older men's wrestlers getting big pushes, but for the older women's wrestlers, not really, unless you're like the bigger names on the roster. And like, yeah, like you said, Mickie James is a veteran worker. Like, why isn't she working on Raw at least? You have 3 hours to fill a match with one of your younger wrestlers, or even just go back to NXT and work with some younger women over there, like in the AEW scenario. Just work with these younger wrestlers, put them over, and make them bigger stars. And it's just very strange, like the way WWE has treated Mickie James. And I think that's a big reason why that's sort of blew. It just adds more to of how WWE doesn't really treat Mickie James as a legend, which in WWE history she is. Like she has all the big moments, and during that whole like Divas era, with of course with Trish Stratus and the WrestleMania match and all that stuff there. And yeah, I agree with you. Like AEW should be like that should be a focus, along with Samoa Joe as well, because they need veteran workers, and I think especially for like backstage as well. I'm sure Dustin, he's doing a great job with the women's division, but still, like it's it'd be good to have more diversity within your backstage roles as well. Like I'm sure Mickey help out in the backstage capacity as well, because AEW, what we know at least, they don't really have women's producers, and so like you bring her on in like as a sort of worker producer type of thing, and that'd be really great because again, like she's a veteran of this industry, she knows the in and outs, she's dealt with a bunch of stuff through the Divas era, the women's evolution, just through so many eras that she's been across, and so she brings so much value to any company that will enter in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what her interests are. I don't know if she's interested in training. I don't know if she's interested in, working backstage. If she is, like you said, it would seem to be a layup as far as, someone with that experience. You're right. There's not. I'm trying to think in WWE, like I know like Sarah Amato is a trainer. I'm trying to think if they. I don't think they have any women's agents on the main roster, at least.
I don't think so. No.
I'm trying to think of like who would it be? Like I don't think Lita works as an agent, or Beth Phoenix or anyone like that. I think like the closest you would have is someone like Natalia, who's an active talent, who's just has a ton of in-ring experience. But yeah, you're right. I think about what AEW's been able to get out of someone like Serena Deeb. Has been clearly very valuable, and just putting her in there with different people and letting her work. A similar thing can be done with Mickie. I totally agree. Yeah, and backstage role, helping young talent. I know they used Mickie as a commentator. A little bit. They had her commentate, I think, a main event.
Right.
And I don't know if that's something she's interested in pursuing. Her owner is just a spot that they put her in to use her at least a little bit. But why wasn't if she wanted to work, why not send her down to NXT? Let her work with some of the greener people that are in NXT. Obviously, there's a ton of women's division, and to an extent, this is part of the issue of not having house shows anymore, especially in Florida, right? They used to have the kind of circuit around Central Florida for NXT, the house shows where they would have a lot of the greener talent, work and get their feet wet, people just making their debut, before they were able to make it on television. In that era, Mickie could be in NXT and she could be working, with people who only have a year or two of experience and getting them ready for television. Without the house shows, her value is basically, can we find a role for you on television? And if they don't feel like they have that, then she's not going to get on television, which, looking back on a hindsight, especially looking at Raw, I mean, how could they not have a spot on television for Mickie James if she was willing to work? Like,
yeah, exactly.
They desperately need, despite the fact that they've done a great job acquiring so much women's talent, the main roster in particular really is in desperate need of people who have credibility as women's wrestlers. I mean, outside of what I would consider like the big, you got your top tier of people. You've got Asuka, Charlotte, Becky, who's not around. Becky's not around. Sasha and Bayley, and then I think you can throw in Bianca. Has ascended to that rung by virtue of being champion. That's pretty much it for people that have credibility within division. Alexa Bliss has been protected historically, but she's not like wrestling really right now. She's doing something else, is how I'll describe what she's currently doing, but it's not number one contender for the women's championship. And they did do a program with Mickie a few years ago. I forget who was her title program against. Do you remember off the top of your head?
I believe it wasn't it Charlotte? It was someone high profile, I think. Or it wasn't just Alexa Bliss.
Yeah, I'm thinking it was Alexa Bliss. But they did, and of course, that whole storyline was based around how old Mickie James was at the time, and that she was like super, super old when I think she was like 39. But Moving on from Mickie James, anyone else on that list you feel like deserves a mention? You're interested to see what they're doing? I have one name in particular I'm interested in seeing, but I'm interested in letting you and seeing what you have to say.
Uh, I think just really just Chelsea Green. Just kind of
Mhm.
unfortunate how her run in WWE went. Like just a mix of injuries and just, of course, Dion Perazzo has been open about it. How she and her have been pitching ideas in NXT. Nothing really stuck. They wanted to be a tag team, but then for some reason no one wanted to do that. And it's just unfortunate how things went with her. Like, of course, she was gonna make her SmackDown debut. She gets injured before that, and I think it was reported that she was likely going to win her debut. So it would have been a hot for her. And so it's just unfortunate how her WWE run.
Yeah, I think she had a real roller coaster of a run, a very kind of strange run. She had the very blink and you missed it, like main roster run. She was part of the Rob Stone brand. She had the tag team, like you mentioned. Really weird kind of run for her on the main roster. The last person I want to mention is Tucker, who I'm going to come across as like the biggest Tucker fan, but so WWE, and I'll say that I have this point relates to points I'm going to make later in this podcast about some other people, but WWE, they recruit a lot of big um, college athletes to the performance center. They get all sorts of football players and collegiate wrestlers and the like, and they've got a bunch of people who are over 6 feet tall and over 250 pounds, and they teach them all to wrestle, and they're all really athletic. And I think as part of that, they can get lost in the shuffle. But if you remove those people, that kind of physical profile from WWE, and you put them out on the independents or you put them in another promotion, they're really going to stand out. So someone like Tucker, who, is I think like 6'3", 6'4", close to 300 pounds, really athletic, was a really good collegiate wrestler, and has shown the ability to work as a wrestler. And I think he's actually was a really underrated in-ring performer. You take them out of WWE, whether it's you're putting them on the independents, you're putting them in AEW, you're putting them in Impact or NWA or Ring of Honor, anywhere. You put them there. To me, they're really going to stand out because you're talking about those people just aren't like walking around looking to get into wrestling. Like those people aren't people with that kind of athletic background and that kind of size are not just, filling up every indie show. It's mostly
Yeah.
smaller people. And to me, if he wants it, I think he could be a big star outside of WWE because I think you give him like this shooter kind of gimmick and you just have him start wrecking people. I'd love to see him show up on AEW Dark and just basically be booked by Brock Lesnar, where he just suplexes people 100 times and gets pins because he has the physical and athletic background to get that character over. And I think in WWE, when he was just like, oh, he's just this guy, literally just this guy, and he's chasing R-Truth and Akira Tozawa, I think you're wasting someone who has unique athletic potential.
Yeah, for sure. Just like you said, a guy that's like what 6'3", 6'4",
Mm-hmm.
just the ways his size. That way he can move as well. It's just he seems like a perfect WWE guy. It's just they seem more interested in Otis because he's like a Chris Farley type. That's just he makes Vince laugh. That's the big thing.
Yes.
Tucker never made Vince laugh, and so that's what hurt Tucker ultimately. And I don't know where his headspace at. It seems like on Twitter he seems interested in talking about how machinery broke up. It seems like he has a lot of stories about all the details behind that. But other than that, I don't know what his motivations are. Whether he whether WWE was the only dream for him, whether it's WWE or nothing else, or whether he is just a wrestling fan. He doesn't really mind wrestling in the indies or Ring of Honor, or like you said, an AEW Dark perhaps, and we get sort of a mini tryout over there. So yeah, I don't know where his headspace is at, but yeah, he has a lot of potential, and hopefully he finds what he's looking for out there in post WWE.
Yeah, you're right about that's a good point about like whether or not they love wrestling. And that's another part with these collegiate athlete types, right? If you go to the independents, the people who are doing that are doing it because they love wrestling to an
Yeah,
extent. And they're not making them you don't start out making any money. It's very, physically rigorous. You got to do a ton of travel. It's such a hustle. You're only doing it if you love it. On the flip side, someone like Tucker, who's recruited out of college to, by whether it was by Gerald Briscoe or whoever to come to WWE, to them, it's like, oh, I never really, cared that much about pro wrestling, but these people are offering me the potential to make a lot of money and to be a TV star. And I'm finishing up my, college career and I don't know what I want to do, like many people who are just about to graduate college. And then they take the job and, maybe, I tried the wrestling thing and now I want to move on with something else. Yeah, I think his real name is Levi Cooper, which is like much better than Tucker as a name. So I'd like to see him use that. I don't know. He's interesting. I think he to me is an interesting guy more so than maybe some of the other, like even like Samurai Del Sol, Kalisto as he was called in WWE. Like he's like a better wrestler than Tucker, but like Kalisto to me is not that interesting of a prospect because unfortunately, he's a smaller guy that can do a lot of cool moves, and there's a lot of every wrestling promotion, that has any form of national prominence has small guys that can do a lot of cool moves. And, maybe he's, whether he's going to go to Mexico, whether he's going to go to, be a star in the independents, whether he's going to, maybe he'll land in AEW or Ring of Honor or a place like that. We don't know, but, to me, he's not like there's a mystery to Tucker's potential that I'm interested in finding out.
Yeah, for sure. And even like the other guys, like Wesley Blake, I admit I haven't really seen a lot of his work, but still, like even from the little bit that I have seen, nothing really has stood out for him and all the other Forgotten Son, the former Forgotten at least. Maybe they'll team up and form a tag team and do their thing. But other than that, I don't really see a lot of potential in that.
Yeah, and one of the things about these guys who have kind of only existed in this WWE sphere, right? With Samoa Joe, we all know what Samoa Joe is about. Like, there's not a mystery of what Samoa Joe will be like outside of the WWE bubble because we have years and years of his career that was, very well documented. And if you're a fan of wrestling, you're generally aware of what Samoa Joe was like before he came to WWE. With someone like Wesley Blake and his partner Steve Cutler, who was released earlier, I think last year, just as an example, I have no idea what their plans are, but we've only seen them really in WWE. I think he worked a few like independent matches when he was being trained by Dory Funk Jr., but really only a WWE team. WWE is creatively stifling to a lot of talent. For all we know, this guy's got like this great idea for a new character, a new gimmick, and when we see him again, maybe he pops up in NWA, maybe he pops up in Ring of Honor. Like maybe he's just like a completely different character and he's got he can cut promos and he can do something that we never saw in WWE because WWE doesn't really allow you to do a lot of that stuff or show a lot of those skills, especially if you're just kind of a preliminary guy.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just a wait and see, I guess, to see whether those guys have ideas that they're coming up with or just a new character perhaps, or just some potential that we haven't seen yet. Like you said, like WWE is creatively stifling, and that's something we've seen. I guess we can transition into the people from last year who were cut, and see that some of them actually were a lot more creative than we actually maybe didn't anticipate. To see how creative they can be, or to see their actual potential that we never saw in WWE.
Yeah, so looking at some of the names that have left WWE in recent years. It can kind of be, I think, everyone is different and everyone's a mixed bag. There have been people who have, had, some hype coming out of WWE that never did anything. Like, remember when Ryback left WWE?
Yeah.
And people were like, oh, wonder what Ryback's going to do outside of WWE. And Ryback, talked about how he was going to do all this stuff outside WWE. And do you remember there was a rumor that the Time Bomb gimmick, which ended up being Hiromu Takahashi in New Japan, in the vignettes, people thought that it might be Ryback. And people were talking.
I didn't know that. Really?
No, that was the thing. Like because they were showing these like little vignettes and video packages with the clock ticking down and stuff on New Japan, and it was kind of like right after Ryback had been released, and there was, like I said, there was some hype around him, and there was legitimately, I remember like people like there's discussions about what do you think Ryback would do in New Japan? What if he's got this time bomb character? Like people thought he was going to be the time bomb, and ended up being Hiromu Takahashi. And in hindsight, is very funny to think about that. What if the time bomb was Ryback, and Ryback was in Los Ingobernables, and like, right? But like Ryback had a lot of hype and potential. Really never. I think he might have done some independent dates, but really never did anything outside of WWE. Wade Barrett, similar kind of thing. I don't know if he wanted to wrestle. He probably could have done whatever he wanted, but elected to not really pursue in-ring work post WWE. And then you kind of like never hear from them again, or you don't hear from them, and then they just pop up randomly, like Tyrus, is Tyus, right? Former Brodus Clay.
Tyrus.
Yeah, Tyrus, who has had a crazy post WWE career where he's in and out of wrestling. He's somehow become a Fox News like pundit. He's getting a push in NWA now. Like he's back. Like, oh, Tyrus is back in wrestling. It's a very strange career for him. But like there's a lot of people who don't do well. I mean, you could look at some of the bigger names, someone like Jon Moxley, who's obviously done very well for himself. Cody, obviously, he's done a tremendous amount of work. But what I'm interested in, what I've become kind of interested in, is the people who were not stars in WWE finding success outside of WWE. I look at a few names. We talked about Tay Conti. We've talked about Tay Conti a couple times on this podcast, but we talked about her earlier in her match with Hikaru Shida. And Conti's an interesting case study in someone who came to WWE originally and had like if you talk to her, I don't want to say she didn't know what pro wrestling was, but she like did not have like that big of a grasp on pro wrestling. They just hired her because she had a look that they liked and an athletic background that they felt like they could work with. And so she comes in, totally, I don't know what I'm trying to think of the right word. Like, she's like, unblemished, just blank slate, goes into NXT, is there for a few years. Really wasn't used on wasn't used on television a lot. I don't know how many TV matches she actually had. The only match that I can remember seeing her in was during the first Mae Young Classic, but really wasn't used. And then she finds, she gets released. And when she got released, I was like, well, that's the end of Tay Conti. Didn't work out. And like, not a wrestler is basically how my reaction was to her. But she stuck around, found a landing spot in AEW, and made clear improvements in the ring. And now it's like, once she got to that level, and now you're like, how did they miss on Tay Conti? How did she never get a chance in WWE? Because she now feels like she checks every box. She's got a great look, great athletic background, great charisma, and that is improved enough as an in-ring worker where you can put her in a 15-minute title match against a veteran worker, and it can be really good. And, she seems to be like a prime example of somebody who's found success in WWE. When she left, it was not expected for her to have success. Like it's very different than like a Jon Moxley or a Cody, who were legitimate big stars when they left.
Even like someone like, I would say like as well. Like I think when he got cut from WWE, I think everyone assumed like, oh, okay, he's still young, he'll find success somewhere else and work out in WWE, but still like he'll find some success somewhere else. And even like Deonna Purrazzo as well, going back to her, like we mentioned before, like she's finding success in Impact, but still I think everyone assumed like, oh, okay, she already has previous success, Ring of Honor, the Indies, and so you would assume that translate to NXT. It didn't, but even when she got cut, like you assumed like, okay, she'll just go back to what she wanted to do. To have a run. But yeah, like you're right, with Tay Conti, I don't expect this at all. And it's credit to her for the hard work she's put in. Like you said, like she didn't really know much about pro wrestling. She's very inexperienced with the business, but clearly like she's put in the work, she's done the education, she's done everything to really make herself into a future star for the company, and that's really impressive to see. And you're right, it's I think people underestimate how many people are in the performance center. There's like hundreds of thousands of
Yeah,
people in the
there's
performance
hundred.
center.
Yeah, there's like I think they've had at any time they have 100. Like for all the people you see on TV and think that's like NXT or that's developmental, there's like 100 people who are like there's like 100 ex-college football players
Yeah.
that are like doing forward roll drills at the performance center, and Matt Bloom is teaching them how to lock up and all this sort of thing. And like I said with Tay, when people were like, oh, AEW should shine Tay Conti, and I was like, I never really like went on the record but on it in any of my writing or anything, but I was like, why would they sign Tay Conti? Like, what do they see in her? And then she, popped up on an episode of AEW Dark, and I'm like, oh, Tay Conti's here. And then she had some matches, like, maybe there's something here. And now it's like, oh my God, Tay Conti's going to be a future champion, and they've stumbled upon gold. And part of it is that some people are using the Tay Conti story as kind of like an example of like the actual true developmental process in WWE not being like up to par, and saying that Tay Conti has improved so much under the tutelage of Dustin and QT and the Nightmare Factory and AEW's kind of internal talent development system, as opposed to the WWE Fancy Pants Performance Center. I don't know if that's true. I think part of it is that Tay Conti was never given a chance, a serious chance in WWE. She kind of got lost in the shuffle. And in NXT, look, in NXT, it's hard for these it's hard for both male and female performers who don't have the extensive independent background to get on NXT television, because they set a standard for there's a high standard for in-ring work and quality, and you can't just have somebody who's just a rookie, just starting out, never had it on television before, never only worked a handful of matches. You can't have them on TV. If you look at that's reflected if you look at who NXT pushes on television, there might be one or two people at a time who are like NXT people who are just starting out, only a few years of experience, but for most part, it's people with 10 years or more of experience. You look at, Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, Finn Balor. Cross doesn't have the same level of experience as those guys, but had a career prior WWE that was well documented. Io Shirai, Candice LeRae, Johnny Gargano, Tommaso Ciampa, like any of the people who are pushed in NXT have decades of experience before coming to WWE. And it's hard for someone like Tay Conti, who's coming, with very little experience, to make it onto television, within the first few years of her career, because the standard's so high.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the new people that they signed. LA Knight, he's already beginning a push right away. Obviously, tons of experience at NWA and Impact. Same with Frankie Monet, tons of experience and Impact, and that's why they're getting pushes right away compared to some of the newer people they signed, like Alex Zane or Blake Christensen or even Christian Casanova. Those guys don't have a ton of experience. That's why they're still in the performance center, or just playing the bodyguards in the Adam Cole Kyle O'Reilly match. That's why they're still undevelopmental, so to speak. And even you have to be an extraordinary talent to actually get a debut like MSK. Like MSK, they have experience in the indies, but still, they're phenomenal talents. That's why they get a push right away for the tag division, and they're now tag team champions. That's why, because they're freakishly athletic and they're exciting for television. And I think that's the big thing as well, especially NXT and US work. Like you're a network, you're on cable television. Like you can't just make mistakes like putting two inexperienced people on television. Like obviously NXT from when it started is so much different from what it is now. Like you can't just make careless decisions, like just having a filler match, so to speak. Like you need to have compelling television. Every sort of minute, every segment needs to matter for USA Network to get what they need for ratings and even just buzz in general. And so, yeah, it's tough out there for all the hundreds of people in the Performance Center just putting in the work and learning the craft. And so, and Evolve may solve that. If that turns out to be a Peacock show, that's where you can potentially, put in your talents, because for a Peacock audience, people are already paid And so like they're not, it doesn't matter if they leave or don't watch it. Like, it just all that matters is just like it's on some type of programming for people to watch potentially.
Yeah, and so one of the things is that there are, similar to the Tay Conti kind of story, but even less so, there are people who have popped up that were like in developmental, but never really used even less than Tay Conti. I think Nick Camaroto is another person who we've seen. We haven't even seen a lot of them of him, on AEW Dynamite, but clearly has a good look and comes across like a kind of like a star or a potential star just because of his size, and he's got the Pampero Furpo or Bruiser Brody giant hair beard combo. Looks like a total wild man. They did the big spot on Wednesday where they broke the chair and he no sold it over him, and you say like, wow, that guy, like, how could you miss on this guy? Like, and he was in WWE, and he wasn't even on. I don't know if he had a single televised match in NXT.
I don't think so.
Yeah, like, so he was a guy. It's like, man, this guy is potentially a huge star, or not potentially, but he's got clear potential. And it was weird to never see him used on television like that. And now he's on AEW, and you're like, man, this guy could be a star. And he's another one that's kind of like, was he just lost in the shuffle? Is he, when you have so many of these big, strong college athletes, does a Nick Camaroto stand out? Probably not. But you take him outside of WWE, you put him in a promotion like AEW, which, has a smaller roster, and like, wow, this guy, looks like a total monster. And I can't believe he hasn't been pushed before.
Yeah, I think what also helps with AEW is that, like, you have the smaller guys in there. I know NXT does too, but just look at, like, they're clearly carrying Cross because he's like a bigger guy in terms of size. And so obviously Camaroto can stand out more in AEW because, they have an emphasis on focusing on how to book bigger guys. Like I remember Griff Garrison, that's what he talked, like he Lance Archer goes up to him and really emphasizes like, oh, you need to work big. Like you can't be bumping around for these smaller guys. You have to work big. And I think that's something they really emphasize in AEW for their bigger guys, is that you have to work like a big guy, and that's what helps you stand out. And it's clearly working for those kind of guys, like a Griff Garrison, and even for a Camaroto. Like he comes off like a huge guy because that's how he's working. And obviously, I don't know what NXT what they emphasize there, but at least in AEW, that's what we're seeing on television, even on Dark as well.
Yeah, with the bigger guys, one of the things you see, compared to WWE, WWE is always the land of the giants. And you look on the independents, like, because the average independent worker is smaller than the average WWE worker, although the WWE roster has gotten smaller over time.
Yeah.
For a variety of different reasons, but because like you can stand out as a you could work like a powerhouse style if you're maybe not prototypical powerhouse size, if you're not like 6'6" and 300 pounds. And then when you get to WWE, it's kind of like, oh, this guy's actually really not that big. I don't know if I take him seriously, doing this. I think like Jonah Rock is an example of a guy who, who's, he's got a different kind of like the Jerry Blackwell body type. I'm only using wrestling references from the 60s and 70s today. But like, he's like shorter and heavy set. Like he's not like 6'8",
Sure.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And when Jonah Rock was, on the independents, he'd have the gimmick where he's a monster and he's, tossing people around and he's doing all that. And when he's working with like someone like Johnny Gargano, he can still do that. But you look at him and you're like, okay, if he stands next to a Karrion Kross, like it's hard to take Jonah Rock seriously as the monster, or, Keith Lee. Obviously Keith Lee was on the independents as well. But you know what I mean? Like there's some of those guys like Nick Camaroto, I'm looking at him right now. Like according to Cage Match, which I don't know is accurate, he says he's 6'3", 270 pounds. Like, okay, that's obviously a big human being in the real world. But gets in WWE, like, okay, like, what does he look like next to Sheamus? What does he look what does he look like next to Braun Strowman?
Mm-hmm.
It's tough to, it's hard when you have like truly gigantic people and for someone who is, big for a normal person, but maybe not like a true giant, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, makes
And
sense.
like Camaroto looks like a big guy. Like even like you think about some of these people, like when Lance Archer was in WWE, when they totally misused him, like he wasn't even presented as like a big guy. He was just like a guy on the roster. He was Vance Archer, and he was this guy who, they would say, oh, he's tall, but they would never like, it wasn't like he was like this monster human being. And once he got out of that bubble and he went to New Japan and now AEW, it's like, oh yeah, he's the Murder Hawk monster. He's the biggest person on the roster, and he's like tossing everybody around. And I do think that helped. But some of these bigger guys, it makes a big difference. Someone else that I've been really impressed by that's found, a home outside of WWE was Dak Draper from Ring of Honor.
Oh, yeah.
Who, like, if again, like similar to like Camaroto or similar to Tucker, like Draper was an All-American amateur wrestler. He's, I don't know, like 6'5", 260, great physique, blonde, just good looking guy, like total, like Vince McMahon never see this guy. Like, how did he not get a push? Like he's checks all of the boxes you would want to have, and he just never got a chance in NXT, let alone a chance on the main roster.
For sure.
And I wasn't that familiar. I didn't even know who he was until I watched, Ring of Honor, and they had this guy, and I was like, man, where did this guy come from? This guy looks like $1 million. And I looked him up, and I'm like, oh, he's a WWE developmental guy. I thought he was just like an independent guy that was, had just been starting out and hadn't appeared on any of the larger independents that would have popped up on my radar screen. But no, he's an ex-WWE guy, University of Central Florida, I think was where he wrestled, which makes sense because it's right in Orlando. And someone probably saw him at a gym or something, was like, oh, you should try out for WWE. But he had a match on the last Ring of Honor pay-per-view with Jonathan Gresham, for the pure title.
Yeah.
And it was like really good. And I was like, this guy, I know working with Gresham, it helps because Gresham's a great worker, and you have a huge size difference that makes it easy for, Draper come across as the heel. But I was really impressed by him, and that's just a similar thing, which is like he gets lost in the shuffle when you sign 500 6'5" guys with athletic backgrounds. But then you take him out of that bubble, you put him in Ring of Honor, and you put him in a promotion working with smaller guys and guys that maybe don't have his same kind of athletic background, and he looks like a total star. And I've been really impressed by him, and I think there are similar people that could be on that vibe. Cesar, Cesar, I can never pronounce his last name. Cesar Bononi.
Yeah, I think it's Bononi or Bononi.
Yeah, but he's a same guy, similar kind of guy, similar build to Draper. Comes up, on through NXT developmental, gets cut last year, and he's found a home on AEW. I don't think he's that good of a wrestler. I think Draper's a much better wrestler in the ring than him, but I think Cesar has found a home in AEW basically as a big, impressive looking jobber, which, it has a limited ceiling, but actually, it's a good role for him because you can put him against, Hangman Page or Jon Moxley. And if the goal is just to get them a win, it looks better for them to beat up a guy who's 6'5" and jacked than it is to beat up, your Brooklyn Brawler type jobber, your schlubby guy who's just like clearly going to be, you know what I mean? Like the typical jobber physique. Instead of doing that, you're beating the shit out of a guy who's giant, and people will be like, oh, that guy, looks more impressive in the squash match style kind of setting.
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting approach for these companies to really look at these ex-WWE guys and see what they can do with them. Like you said, like a Dak Draper looks really good in the pure rules setting, and I think that's just because there's a growing appetite for that kind of match. More technical, blood sport style matches. There's growing appetite for that, and it's kind of interesting to see, to lead more into that and to really different styles within their company. And I think it is worth an investment, at least, to look at these ex-WWE people, even the ones that we don't know about. Like you said, like a Dak Draper, no one knew who he was, minus maybe people who went to the Florida live events, who saw these people. But other than that, like, most people didn't really see them.
Yeah, I know he spent time like on the independents in between finding his way into Ring of Honor, but he's also like a guy who went out there and like you said, we mentioned this when we were talking about Tucker. Like, do they love pro wrestling? Do they want to make it? Do they want to make it outside of
Mhm.
WWE? Or are they like, now that I don't have the lore of WWE in front of me, I'm going to go do something else with my life. He's someone that clearly has taken the time to try to make it outside of WWE, and I'd be, I Ring of Honor. I think they've done a good job finding him and keeping him, and I think he's got a ton of potential. I think similar thing if you look at a Camaroto type, who I was like, I told the story before, but I didn't know who Camaroto was. I switched on to Dynamite, and John Moxley was getting beaten up by this big guy, and I was like, who the hell is this guy beating the crap out of John Moxley? He looks really intriguing again because size isn't everything, and you can be great with smaller size, but it helps to be big in wrestling.
Yes.
You're so much better off being a bigger when you're bigger because you like I said, you're eye catching. It's like, wow, this guy is beating up John Moxley, and I've never seen him before in my life. Where did he come from? And it's like, oh, it's Nick Camaroto. He was in WWE, and now he's been training with Dustin, and they put him on. Now you see Camaroto is kind of getting a push. They got the QT Marshall stable, which to me is not about QT. It's about, mainly a Go-Go and Camaroto and then a little bit of Aaron Solo as also. But like QT is the figurehead, but it's really just a vehicle to get more TV time for Camaroto and a Go-Go.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
And I think it's going to work out, or it has worked out so far. I feel more interested in both of those guys, and they have very different kind of backgrounds getting into wrestling, but they're a similar kind of case where they're guys who are going to need more experience but have clear and obvious potential.
Yeah, it's also interesting to look at for the AEW side, like the people who tried out for WWE but didn't make it. Like Sammy Guevara tried out for WWE. He didn't like how there were these, ex-football players, these ex-weightlifters who care about wrestling, and that turned him off, and that's why he didn't want to be in WWE. Big Swole, she said she's tried out WWE as well. I think Eddie Kingston said like they're all part of the same trial class all together, and they all didn't make it for one reason or another. And even I think Brian Cage has tried out for WWE as well. It's crazy Brian Cage didn't make it in for whatever reason, and so it's just interesting to see the people that get in WWE and people who don't make it to WWE and see like where they go after that, after sort of failing out for WWE, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think over the last 10 years or so, WWE's interest in talent, especially independent talent that might not fit their typical mold, like someone like Eddie Kingston being a good example, is kind of varied. I think they went through a phase where like, we're not going to sign basically anybody from the independents unless they have a certain look that we like to see. And then you had like Punk and Bryan kind of changed that a little bit. NXT starts as essentially a competitor to the established independent branch, and you start seeing people like Pac, and then Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, and independent stars, Gargano and Ciampa coming later, independent stars coming in and working NXT as kind of, and eventually they find their way in the main roster, and now you see a lot of independent wrestlers, guys who had group, basically almost everybody that's like could be considered a star in WWE, started on the independents in some way. Obviously, there's people like Roman Reigns and Braun Strowman who are exceptions to that, but you look at Seth Rollins, you look at Drew McIntyre, you look at Sheamus, you look at I guess Bobby Lashley is another developmental guy, but plenty of the talent started on the independents, and I think lately, especially with like you talked about, you mentioned some of the guys like Blake Christian in talent that they kind of signed, Alex Zane, like guys who they signed. That's totally. You look at those guys getting signed compared to previous eras of talent that were not signed. To me, it shows a huge difference in wanting to hold on to more talent and acquire as much talent as possible because they're worried about that talent doing things outside of WWE, whether it's for AEW or New Japan or another company. But with things like NXT Evolve starting up, they want to get as many good hands on possible to make sure they continue to churn out, content and have suitable workers on every single show that they have. You look at like for instance, like you look at when Davey Richards and Eddie Edwards tried out for WWE, and they even, I think, wrestled on NXT television.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, like, you know what? No, we don't need you guys. Like, could you imagine that happening? Now, maybe there was a personal issue there, but could you imagine that happening now? Like, the fact that anyone that gets any single buzz on the independents, like, is immediately trying to be signed by WWE. But, like, you look at where, like, Davey Richards and Eddie Edwards were 10 years ago when they had that tryout, or feels like 10 years ago. Probably was more like 7 or 8 years ago. And then they were told no. It's night and day about how open they are to these independent names.
Yeah, and especially for the women as well. They're leaning towards signing them like younger, like Elena Black and Priscilla Kelly are so young, and they haven't really, especially for like she was just starting to break out on the indie scene, and she gets signed right away. I think she's only like 20 or 21, and Zoe Stark, she's really young as well, but they, her, and I guess they think she's the most TV ready out of that trio, and obviously we've seen her just this past week, get a big high profile role, working like as the veteran, so to speak, for the new star in Saray. And so it's interesting to see, like you said, like they're obviously really up for more content for NXT Evolve, but they're also competing with other people to have call dibs on talent, so to use that phrase, want dibs on talent to say, hey, we want them. We don't have any plans for them right now, except for a rare fee, but we just want them under our system, just in case, so that they don't become bigger stars in other places.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you're never, especially when you're requiring this much talent, you're never going to be able to satisfy everybody. You're always going to have people who feel like they should be pushed more, that they aren't being pushed, and you can only hold on to that talent for so long before they, demand a release or don't sign a new contract. And that will always lead to people having to find success outside of WWE, especially if they think they can be stars. And you saw that, Moxley. I don't know if Moxley was upset. Moxley, to me, wasn't, when he left, it wasn't because he was upset that he wasn't being pushed as a star. I think he was upset with how he was managed, how controlling everyone was, how he had to do a bunch of stuff that he thought was stupid. But he wasn't upset with, like, his spot. Cody, to me, was someone who was upset with his spot on the card. He was someone who felt like he could be a top star and was being relegated to this comedy mid-card act. That varies. I think Miro has been a really interesting post-WWE career. I think he'll get a lot of differentiating opinions on how it's gone for him so far. I think he's been awesome, like the last month or so. Since I thought he was awesome in the Arcade Anarchy match. I thought he's been awesome like these last few weeks, cutting these quick promos about how serious he is and how he's going to start killing people. I'm thinking that he's someone that's shaping up, I think, to have a really big 2021. But yeah, he was a guy who was released last year that people were looking at, wondering what he would do, because I think people thought he could be a really big star, and I don't think he's gotten there yet, but I think he's in a position where he can be this year.
Yeah, I think another name that's interesting is EC3. I think for him, a lot of people thought he'd have like huge potential. Except for LA Knight, everyone respected, EC3. He's a great talker. He has great character that we saw in Impact, and people thought that would translate really well in WWE. But for some reason, at least in his main roster debut, he debuted way too early, in my opinion, at least from NXT to the main roster. Even then, he was like a mute character for one reason or another. Like his great skill is that he's a great on the mic, utilize that at all, and so he gets released long from last year. And he's had an interesting post WWE career. He's worked on Impact and Ring of Honor in varying degrees. He hasn't really had one big storyline in Ring of Honor. Well, at least in Impact, he had that feud of Moose over the TNA title, and it's just been kind of interesting. I wouldn't say he hasn't reached his expectations at all, but he hasn't really achieved as well. He's sort of just in that middle range where he's doing okay work, but he's not doing anything remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, I like I said on the same show that I was talking about, the same Ring of Honor pay-per-view that I was talking about, the Dak Draper and John Gresham match, EC3 had a match with Jay Briscoe. And I hadn't really I'll be honest, had not been following EC3's post-WWE career really at all. And I was really intrigued by what he was trying to do, which he had this very strange character where he like was like this weird like brooding like husk of a man who felt like he wasn't a baby face, he wasn't a heel, he was like felt like he was like this almost like lost soul looking for acceptance. And it was really interesting, and I was much more interested watching him. He wrestled a very long match with Jay Briscoe. The work in the match and the match itself wasn't like great, but I was very intrigued by the story they were telling with his character. And unfortunately, he's got like an infection. He was had to be hospitalized.
Yeah.
So I hope he's able to come back, soon and healthy. First of all, but I was really interested in watching him because I never really like enjoyed like the knockoff rich kid Ted DiBiase kind of style gimmick where he was like basically doing like what I would call like a poor man's MJF at this point.
Sure.
And he had been doing it for a while, going back to his debut in Impact, back in 2013, 2014, where he was Dixie Carter's nephew or something. But I was really interested in him because he has first of all, he has just a great physique that you just don't see outside of WWE really at all, except for a handful of few people, and he he's trying something different, and I really enjoy. I was very interested in seeing where he's going to go with that. And yeah, he's a guy that again, had a blink and you missed it run in NXT, and he's up on the main roster, and just was like basically immediately lost in the shuffle, and they punted on him very quickly, even though he would seem like a kind of guy that Vince would want to push thanks to his physique and his ability to talk. But those people, when you have so much talent, and WWE really does have so much talent, people are always going to get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, and like I'm just curious to see what he's doing with his character. Like you said, like, it is a unique character. Curious to see whether that will translate more with fans and the audience to reacting to his character, because obviously he hasn't been wrestling in front of fans, and so it's kind of hard to get a grasp of like, okay, like you said, like, is he a heel? Is he a face? Like, I don't know, like what we're supposed, how are we supposed to react to this? But maybe like with fans there, maybe that could get a grasp of what what he really wants, this new character that he's trying.
Yeah. I don't know. It's almost like his gimmick is almost better in the empty arena era than the live event era. I'm just as a viewer, I was very intrigued by it because, like I said, the match he had with Jay Briscoe was like, he basically was trying to earn Jay Briscoe's respect, as by taking a beating. So Briscoe is kicking the crap out of him, and he keeps getting back up, and he's got these weird mannerisms, and because it's empty arena, he's talking to Jay, and like he refused to give up, and eventually like at the end he loses, and Jay Briscoe acknowledges that he was he had taken a beating, and he impressed Jay Briscoe, and it's just so different than his previous character. I don't really know how to. I'm kind of doing an okay. I don't think I'm doing like a tremendous job describing it. I recommend people going to watch the match. The whole I like that Ring of Honor show. It was the 19th anniversary show from last month. I thought that was really interesting kind of match. But we're gonna wrap things up here. Jason, you got anything else you want to say?
No, just for the best for the recently released talents. I think on the Observer, like there's a story about Kalisto. Oh, he like cutting his throat. Like that was the one line in the newsletter. Like hopefully Kalisto's doing well. In a mental standpoint as well. Just for everyone, just wish them the best of luck on whatever they want to do with their lives, because obviously now they have the control of what they want to do with their careers.
Yeah, definitely. All right. And we appreciate everyone who continues to listen and like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know what your thoughts on some of the release talent. And we'll see you again in a couple weeks.